I'm gonna go ahead and read some stories that I found on the internet. One is something that most Mexicanos know of, this urban legend, La Llorona. Originally, the story goes as this young lady who fell in love with a male, and unfortunately he fell in love with somebody else. And while they were married, they had 2 children, and she couldn't stand the fact that she could see the resemblance of her husband who left her in her children's faces. So one day she took him to the water, to a nearby river, and killed him. I do believe a river is a very great element in our world, and that element can connect a lot. So I feel like she can travel through these bodies of water, and we're surrounded by them. This happened to me when I was 11 years old. It was in the 90s. I have lived in my whole life in Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One popular legend is the Weeping Woman, aka La Llorona. She wears a white gown. She roams the rivers and creeks, wailing all night, searching for her children to drag, screaming, to a watery grave. Nobody really knows why the legend of La Llorona became. However, she was doomed to find her children because she drowned them. One night, just like any other night, I lived in the trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying there with us, and my aunt as well. I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and I woke up and I was in the sofa in the living room. The time was at 4 o'clock, which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and normally I had a light on it, but this time it was pitch black. I woke up and I heard a horrible scream that was coming from the far distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch. It was a few feet away from my home. I heard it and I thought I was hearing things. I asked myself, am I dreaming? Then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced even before. It sounded like it was a big hallway and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. Then all the screaming, I started to make out the words. These words became by whoever this was at 4 a.m. screaming their guts out. Shocked me. In a huge panic, I quickly got up out of the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was sleeping. Ran into my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly. To my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke up. Go back to sleep. It's most likely your imagination. My mother's family is Hispanic, and we have wonderful family reunions every summer. One of these times, my cousin made a lovely trivia game and had several questions about my grandmother and her siblings. It was all very fun, and I enjoyed learning about my great aunts and uncles, but one question struck me as odd. When she was young, she had a pet chicken that would speak to her. I thought this was a little strange, but the game went on. My mother happened to be the one to answer the question, so I asked her about it later in the day. I asked about the chicken. My mother told me that my great aunt did indeed have a chicken that would speak to her. I laughed about it, but I could tell my mom was serious. My grandma was sitting nearby and chimed in. She told me that my great aunt has been very sensitive to certain things. My grandma never doubted that my aunt was talking to the chicken, but she wasn't sure who was talking to my aunt. At this point, I was very intrigued and had a small case of heebie-jeebies. She asked me if I knew the legend of La Llorona. I wasn't familiar, so here's the tale. She said that when they were children, they lived near a water. My aunt who spoke to the chicken was only an infant. My great-grandmother had laid my aunt in her crib, which happened to be near the window that faced the water. After a little while, my aunt began to cry. My great-grandmother walked into the nursery and froze. A black figure was reaching through the window and reaching for my aunt. My great-grandmother began invoking the name of Christ. The figure recoiled from my aunt and out of the window. My great-grandmother watched the entity walk along the wall and recede into the water. Now Llorona had tried to take my aunt. Ooh, that's chilling. Mom is from a small town in Mexico, located in Zacatecas. When she was around 14, she had a habit of waking her mom up to go to the restroom. Since it was an older home, the restroom was located outside. Those are creepy. My mom tells me it was around 3 a.m. when she woke up and felt the need to go to use the restroom urgently. So she began calling out my mom. After a while, her mom never responded, and she get agitated and started screaming. At this point, my mom turns around and at the foot of her bed, she sees her mom standing there. She was wearing a white robe, but had a very bleak expression on her face. Both of her arms were extended. My mom said that she suddenly felt extreme cold and a huge sense of dread. She had never seen her mom wear a white robe. Then when she looked down and saw that my mom's feet weren't touching the floor, at that moment she screamed and quickly threw her covers on her head. Her mom was wearing something completely different. Runs in to find my mom shaking in her bed. Nobody believes my mom. Everyone told me it was just a dream, until a few days later there was a power outage. During this, my mom and I and a few of her siblings were at her parents' and decided to sleep in the living room. Around the same time, 3 a.m., they heard the same unedible wails of La Llorona down the street. None of them slept that night. Here's another one. My mom was 10 years old and lived next to a small ditch next to a highway. She stayed at her friend's house, which was a little closer to the ditch. The night came and they knew it was time to go home once they saw the street lights come on. They were sitting in the friend's bedroom, radio on, listening to music and playing card games. It was already dark outside, and the music from the stereo filled the room. Now, my mom's friend lived with her mom and grandma, who both spoke fluent Spanish. My mom understood it but couldn't speak it. My mom developed this overwhelming sense of anxiety and terror. Then it started crying. The girls brushed it off as a cat or drunken neighbor. Soon the crying become louder and more obnoxious, like it wanted to be heard. These girls paused what they were doing and stared out the window. Once they looked that way, the crying became ear-splitting, so loud it resonated over the stereo. Both girls having hands over their ears, fearful of what was happening. The grandma burst into the room, holy water in one hand and rosary in the other. She was screaming over the crying, praying in Spanish. My mom said that's when she did it. The radio started to static and the lights began to flicker. Both of the crying and the praying boomed extremely loud until quiet. It all stopped. The grandma said a prayer over the mom and her granddaughter and made them go into the living room, instructing them not to return to the room for the night and not to look out the window. My mom returned home in the morning, not speaking of what happened, even when she tells the story now, as overwhelming sense of fear takes over and she gets those goosebumps. So we spoke a little bit about Mexicanos folklore legends. I want to speak a little bit about the Salvadorian legend. Her name is La Sihuanaba. Even saying her name gives me chills. The only experience I've had was when I went to Salvador myself, and one time my grandma didn't put the radio. She put the radio on every night, and that one time she didn't, and the animals started reacting in a negative way as well, and you heard her whistle. And I remember I was in bed with my mom, and she was just like, just don't whistle. Just stay quiet. And she passed by, and that was one of the most scariest experiences I had over there. I want to read a little bit more about her. The Sihuanaba is a Salvador mythological character that shows herself in a phantom female form and a beautiful body. But when you look at her closely, she has a face of a mare. Usually she goes for the men who are unfaithful, also appears regularly in uninhabitable places, especially in the dumps, ravines, and rivers, where she leads men to their death with a fake illusion of love and makes them fall in a ravine which causes them to lose their soul. It's like a charm of a mermaid, the legend. She was originally called Sihuanaba, beautiful woman. In the mythology, had an affair with the son of God Tialok, which became pregnant. But she was a really bad mother because she was leaving her son alone to meet with her lover. When Tialok found out what was happening, Sulit was cursed with the name Sihuanaba, which means ugly woman. She would be the beautiful at first sight, but when men approached her, she would turn into this horrible being with a scary, ugly face. The god commanded her to wander the countryside with the purpose of appearing to all the men that travel alone at night. The native people of the country say that the ghost appears at night in the rivers of El Salvador, usually washing clothes and always looking for her son called Ciputillo, which was granted with eternal youth by the god Tialok, who had the purpose of torture Sihuanaba. According to the legends, all the people who spend the night in the forest of the Salvador are most likely to find her. However, she follows the men in love, the Don Juans who boast about their sexual adventures. To these, the Sihuanaba appears to them. So I have no idea why my video got interfered like that. So I'll go ahead and finish the reading through a voiceover. To these, the Sihuanaba appears to them in any tank of water very late at night or any banks of river, according to other versions. She washes herself with gold water in a tree and brushes her beautiful black hair with a comb of the same metal. Her beautiful body is revealed through her transparent nightgown. Some traditions mention that men who go crazy for her appearance follow her in that moment. The Sihuanaba calls for her victims, and conducts them up to the ravine. Then she shows her face. When they earned it, a face pale of dead, with eyes out of their sockets, both of them red as blood. Also, her porcelain skin, suits delicate, becomes wrinkly and greenish. Her nails grow, and the worst thing of all, definitely, is the sound of her righteous laugh of horror, which paralyzes her listeners. If you ever catch this Sihuanaba, shout 3 times, "No te vayas a ir, Maria Pate de Gallina," which means you're not going anywhere, Cabgrass Mary. If it is a Sihuanaba, she'll be scared and will throw herself into a ravine. If she's not, the people will just tell you that you're crazy, but at least you spend the scare. Take the necessary precautions otherwise. Do not ask if you ever say that you were touched by the Sihuanaba. Her son is named El Ciputillo, Cipit, a name originated from the Nahuatl word used to refer to children. Is not only one of the most popular tales in South and Central America culture, but also happens to be illegitimate son of the infamous Sihuanaba. While his mother was condemned for forever wonder, this boy was sentenced to eternal youth. He is not a threatening spirit, but instead he's being of a jokester. He is dressed rather shabbily and has a big hat and a big belly. Interesting, many versions of that. His large bare feet face backwards, so nobody can find when they try to follow his footprints. While he is harmless, he is obnoxious, known to throw pebbles at pretty girls as they wash their clothes in the river, along with appearing in the night, laugh, dance, whistle, and joke, and ultimately just to make a great deal of noise. Most legends say that he is often seen eating the banana, and some stories say that he's the ability to disappear from one place to reappear to another. El Ciputillo is known to eat ashes, leftovers in rural kitchens, and is often used as an excuse when people wake to find a mess in the kitchen in the morning. These characters is perhaps one of the most popular among folklore, and he seems entertaining enough to deserve this title.